Available everywhere.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hopefully, you guys have enjoyed the show thus far. We are in the home stretch of today's show. And for our fourth segment of the day, we have a treat for you. The triumphant return of one of my favorite news segments, Fact versus Fiction, where I either debunk or justify some bold fantasy football takes I've come up with myself throughout the week. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. We've got four really good ones that can be interpreted in many different ways, and this is just my personal opinion on them. Let me know what you think. If you have your own kind of bold fantasy takes based off of fact or fiction that you want to bring up as well in the comments, let me know. But let's get right into it. Starting off with one of my favorite takes that I've ever come up with as a Seattle Seahawks fan, Geno Smith being a top 10 fantasy QB. And this is fact. Unfortunately for any Geno deniers or non-supporters or just people who don't necessarily get swayed by mid-tier QBs who play at a top level, it's the truth. It's the reality of the situation right now. Geno Smith might just be one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league, period. Not just statistically, but from the eye test, from how he's really elevated this Seattle team that's certainly needing his high level of play due to the struggles of this offensive line and things of that nature. And it's translating into fantasy, and I can't believe that in my personal league, perhaps in yours as well, he still might be out there on the waiver wire, just sitting there. And I feel like I don't necessarily have to prove too much about this point. It's just that I feel like the reason why people are kind of let down, I guess, by Geno is because of the fact he doesn't have, the most appealing stats on paper in certain moments. For example, the San Fran game certainly didn't have that many appealing stats, and a lot of his production came in cleanup duty and garbage time. And so that's the kind of caveat to this. But I still think when you break this down and look at Geno and what he's done this season, how he's leading the league in passing yards per game, and looking at the pass attempts he's had, it's crazy to contemplate what he's doing, especially in terms of how efficient he's been as well in guiding the Seattle offense. That you can't ignore the fact that he truly is someone who you're going to have to look at and say, hey, this is a guy who I might not have liked the start of the season and I might never like, but is still someone who has such a high upside, a high ceiling from a fantasy perspective that I can't deny him. And if you're someone who does not have much quarterback depth in your fantasy team, go out there and get him off waivers, because I guarantee you that will, really get the notion around that Geno Smith is someone to be reckoned with in fantasy. But that's just my 2 cents there. And it's completely and utterly quote-unquote unbiased, but I'm just trying to defend my guy, Geno Smith. And the next one is a bit of a weird one here that I feel is going to really start to make sense in the next couple of weeks. Amari Cooper being a viable fantasy asset. And I say it's a fact because when I think about the Bills, I think about a team that can really integrate him in a way that continues to steady the hand of Josh Allen. I don't necessarily think that bringing in Amari Cooper will immediately allow Josh Allen to stretch the field, but the reason I put for now next to fact is because, when the Bills become more pass happy, that's where I feel like Josh Allen tries to be the hero too much. And I feel like this trade for Amari Cooper is shrewd because Amari Cooper is a difference maker, but he's not someone who completely unsettles an offense wherever he goes like Stephon Diggs does. He's not someone who demands attention. He's just someone who really diversifies what you do and opens up your playbook a little bit more. And so I feel like Amari Cooper's going to be as valuable as a fantasy asset as Josh Allen makes him, if that makes sense. Because week in, week out, there are going to be moments where Josh Allen puts up a pretty bad game or a pretty pedestrian game by his standards. And through no fault of his own, Amari Cooper is going to have to get called into question for it. But in the grand scheme of things, he's still someone who brings to light what the Bills' offense can be, if, they were to open up a little bit. Because I still feel the right way to go with them is by sticking with, Josh Allen simplifying everything and not jumping to the vertical pass game. But this is an interesting one to contemplate because of what Amari Cooper represents in terms of why the Bills traded him. Because of why they traded for him is because they feel like the vertical passing game needs to be a big part of what they do going forward, then so be it. But if it's not, then there are going to be certain moments where this relationship gets called into question because of what Josh Allen means to his development for the Bills. So that's why I feel like for now he can be a viable fantasy asset, but in the future we're going to have to see how this pans out because it's all contingent on what Josh Allen does for this offense. And the third one I want to talk about is the Falcons' offense cooked. Now you can say the same about their opponents, but I feel like this one is fiction. I feel that this was one of those games where they just got gut punched, man. This just felt like a very weird game in terms of the vibe of the Falcons. And, I am concerned about Kirk Cousins because of the fact that he doesn't offer you much in terms of escapability and creation out of structure. But when he gets enough protection, when he's able to sit in the pocket, he can deliver precision passes to the short to intermediate areas of the field and manage the game at a high level. And we saw it in the last matchup as well, where he threw for 500 yards. So I do feel like there are certain points the Falcons might want to address in order to fix this offense, but it's not completely quote-unquote cooked, like I say. It's still an offense with fantastic pieces, two of the best running backs in the league, one of the best rooms in the league for that matter, and a lot of young guys in their skill position groups that I feel just need to find that rhythm week in, week out, and the consistency will follow. And so I feel like people are going to start placing too much weight in quote-unquote meaningless games for the Falcons, and that they're going to panic and say, they shouldn't be getting blown out by such and such team. The fact of the matter is they play in the NFC South, and if they win those games, they should be fine here, and they should contend with the Bucs for the NFC South. Now, I will be concerned about this offense, and this could become a fact come playoff time, when, a lot of the ineptitudes of this offense could be called into light because of the fact Kirk Cousins isn't a mobile quarterback who, in a playoff setting, can win you many games. We saw it with his time with the Vikings as well, where he lost the Giants that one year, mainly due to the fact he could not create outside of structure. But at the end of the day, in the regular season, a little just over a quarter of the way through the season, I feel that the Falcons' offense has enough to get them to a place where they want to be. And I don't think people should raise their expectations. I feel like they just need to get to the playoffs, and a lot of people's expectations should be met, but, this is the NFL. A lot of teams, when they have hope about their teams, blow things out of proportion. And so I feel like the Falcons' offense is good for what it is, and that is to take care of business in their own division and hope that in the playoffs they can make a little bit of a run. But for now, I'm saying this is fiction potentially my mind changes in a couple of months. And then the last one that I want to get to is another interesting one, just because we talked about the situation a little bit at the start of the show, and because, I don't necessarily know how much this guy is going to really alleviate some of the questions this fan base might have about the future of this team. But for now, he's going to be a fun, frisky player who you might want to look out for on the open market in fantasy, and that is Jameis Winston, potentially being a high-end QB2. I did put if the starter, but now that we know, I do feel like this becomes a much more prescient take, and I do feel it is a fact. And like I said, there's not that much optimism outside of some key guys on that Browns offense, but I do feel like the presence of Jameis Winston for this team really makes it a lot more positive, a lot more optimistic, and most importantly, a lot more uplifted. Because I feel under Deshaun, they were just beginning to become stagnant, and Deshaun's presence just overwhelmed what the Browns offense believed they could be, if that makes sense. It consumed them that the ineptitude of their quarterback play was so bad that it held them back a little bit. And now I feel like the freedom Jameis Winston brings to the table allows the Browns to kind of relax. Now, I'm not saying, again, like I said in the injury segment, I'm not saying that it's going to be an 11-0 Browns team the rest of the way. I'm saying that what Jameis can bring to the table is potentially the difference between maybe going out and hitting panic mode and reaching for a quarterback in this year's draft, and, potentially having him for 1 year and making Deshaun Watson the highest paid backup in the league. And I feel that's the best way forward, to be honest with you, for the Browns, because if you want to eat that much dead money in the future with Deshaun, should you cut him, then by all means do it, but it just makes you look that even more bad, because this is already one of the worst contracts in the history of the NFL. And so you have to find some way to justify it. And should Jameis Winston prove that he's a competent, serviceable quarterback for you, maybe either you do go into the draft a quarterback and have him sit behind Jameis, or, wait till an opportune time where Deshaun's contract might not mean as much to you in the future, but that's not looking like the case, then, I feel like the situation can be a little bit more alleviated. But if I'm Jameis Winston, though, the pressure's completely off me. I feel like, he came into this organization just wanting to have an opportunity. He's always someone who wants to serve his team for the better in whatever capacity. And we see it. No matter if he's the backup, no matter if he's the starter. He just brings his brand of intensity, of swagger to every single team he's played for in his career. And for better or worse, I feel like his motivational presence will lend more towards the side of positivity for a Browns team than anything else. But those are my fact versus fiction takes of the week. Let me know what you think about them. Coming up next to close out today's show, we look ahead to Sunday Night Football and that game that might be a little bit contentious in the future. We'll be right back to close out the show by talking about it after this short break.